That's Influence Music on NBL with Melody Noel, and nobody leaves the same. Well, I pray that's going to be the case for those who are listening to our conversation today, because we want to welcome back to NBL here two very special women who you've heard from many times here on WDCX. Erin Kelly Bean, Erin Kelly, the daughter of Jim Kelly, of course, married to Parker Bean, Erin Kelly Bean, and her mom, Jill Kelly, the wife of former Buffalo Bills quarterback Jim Kelly. So anyway, ladies, welcome to NBL. How are you?
Thank you.
Hi, Neil.
How are you?
This is great. So I got each of you on telephones here, separate lines, and I don't know, are you in separate locations today, Erin? Are you guys in separate places?
Oh, no, we're together. My husband and I moved back to Buffalo, so thankfully we're back home. So my mom and I are in the same house. We're just not in the same room, and we apologize for our voices. We might have a little bit of a cold, or we were screaming too much at the Bills game this past weekend. So one or the other, or maybe both.
Okay, well, that explains it. No, I caught wind of the fact there was a rumor out there that you and Parker had moved back to the Buffalo area, so welcome home, permanent residents of Western New York again. I was just curious as to whether you're in the same house, so, like, for the sake of this interview. But, yeah, Jill, thanks for letting us know about what Erin's been up to, and now you're going to be joining her in a new podcast called Light Your Heart with Hope. We'll hear more about that in a minute, but thanks for making the call. We always love to let our listeners know what the Kellys have been up to.
Well, I miss WDCX, Neil. We haven't been on a show in a really long time. So it's been a long time coming, I feel like. And I love your listeners. I loved doing the show in the past, and so I'm so thankful to be back. And I'm also thankful that my daughter and her husband are back in Western New York and living with us, which is awesome. I said, hey, now it's time for grandchildren. You have a built-in babysitter.
There you go.
I'm right here. I can take care of business, homeschool. I'll do it all. But it is such an honor to be back on with you, and such a blessing to have Erin and Parker back, and to be able to do a podcast with my daughter.
Yeah. Well, listen, how exciting to know that you are back, Erin. And since your mom went there, I'm just going to say, what are we, you don't have any announcements to make right now, right? But perhaps in the future, soon maybe?
No announcements yet. Announcements
Okay.
yet. Maybe in the next few years. We'll see.
Okay.
God's timing.
It's funny. I was talking to Mary the other day, and she was telling me about how she remembers exactly where she was when she found out, that her kids were having babies and stuff. And in the case of my daughter, Beth, one day Beth said to her mom, I don't feel good. I feel kind of nauseous and stuff. And Mary looked at her and said, Beth? She goes, what? She goes, are you late? and that was it. And that was our first grandchild right there, so God has a way. Anyway, it's just a blessing that we get a chance to spend a little time with you guys. And how exciting. This time is really amazing, because God has opened a brand new door for you to participate together in a special podcast that I know is in some ways affiliated with Hunter's Hope, named after Jill, your son, and Erin, your brother, who's home with Jesus today. But Erin, I'm going to ask you to describe it. So this is a podcast that apparently kicked off on Tuesday this week, the first episode on the 7th of November, called Light Your Heart with Hope. But tell us a little bit about the podcast and what it's going to be like.
Yeah, so Hunter's Hope, our symbol for Hunter's Hope, our logo is a heart with a flame in the middle of it, and it stands for Light Your Heart with Hope. And really that has always been the foundation's goal, is to bring the hope of Christ, and also, hope that, for these children that are being born with these disease that my brother had, or similar diseases, and just bring them the hope of hopefully one day a cure and all of those things. But in the midst of it, we found that, we realized that we wanted to share the greater hope of Christ, and that really is what this podcast is all about. It's an extension of the mission of Hunter's Hope. And my amazing grandma, who is just the CEO of Hunter's Hope, and she's incredible. She reached out to me at the beginning of the year and was wondering if I wanted to be involved in creating this podcast and sharing our family stories, families that are a part of our Hunter's Hope community. And so she did all of these interviews, and when I moved back to Buffalo, I said, let's do this thing, because I recognized, after listening to so many of these people share their story, that they had so much to offer. And it made me realize, too, that everyone has a story. We all have a story, no matter what we've walked through, what we're currently walking through. God has given us a testimony and a story of hope that's meant to be shared. And so that's really what this podcast is. And the first episode was released, and it was my mom's, and she shares her story, which, yes, I feel like a lot of the listeners may have heard her story shared before, but this is shared in a different light and in a different way, and it's very real and raw, and I'm just so thankful that we were able to kick it off with our family story, with my mom's story. And that's, through this podcast, my prayer is that God will do immeasurably more than we can ever imagine, and that the listener would truly be encouraged.
I got a bunch of questions for your mom in a moment, but let me just ask you one more, Erin, if you don't mind. I understand, and I don't even think it's been released yet, but the first episode, of course, was Tuesday this week, November 7th. But Tuesdays and Fridays, you come out with not only the first episode, but then sort of your reaction to it. And I guess on Fridays, I don't know what you call it, but you and your mom sort of comment on what was shared in the testimony portion on Tuesday. Am I correct about that?
It's actually that the main episode releases on Monday.
Oh, Monday.
So Mondays
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Monday, the 7th, yes. We release every main episode on Monday, and that main episode is the story. So I introduce our guests, and then they really just share their story, their complete story. It's really not an interview style. We really just want to give them the space to be able to talk about their life and what God has done. And then I just close it out. And then throughout the week, we really just, through social media, are sharing encouragement and things that, we personally have learned and hope that someone else will be encouraged by through Monday's episode. And then on Friday, yes, my mom and I come together for what we like to call the immeasurably more mini messages. And those are short episodes between my mom and I where it's really just a conversation. It's a conversation between us about what we took away from Monday's message and just some nugget of hope that we found in it, that we hope that, even someone who wasn't able to listen to the podcast on Monday, that they would be able to tune in to this mini message and get hope and encouragement out of it too. So I love doing these mini messages together. It's been so great, and just to be able to have these conversations with my mom, and just even these are encouraging us in our faith as we're talking about it. So
Sure.
We really hope that the same happens for the listener.
And I think it will. The concept is really powerful. Jill, I want to ask you something in a minute, but first, Erin, let me go back and just say, as you were talking, I was thinking about a guy named Leighton Ford. He was an associate evangelist with the Billy Graham Association for so many years, and he wrote a book, several decades ago called The Power of Story. And that, when we tell the story of who God is and what he's done in our lives and how he met us in the midst of our pain or provided for us when we had needs, he healed us, he delivered us, saved us, forgave us, whatever the issue is, that as we talk about, him being that very present help in our time of trouble, we're expressing, obviously, what has happened, but it's then a blessing to others. And then as others listen to that and they begin to comment on it, much like you guys are going to be doing in the Immeasurably More segment, you're saying, here's what I learned from that, here's what I heard, but others may be saying, that's true, and I never even thought of that, because here's what I was thinking. And we this beautiful picture begins to emerge of the various aspects of the totality of what God was doing, because any one of us might just see part of it, Others will see more of it. And then, even in, for instance, you and your mom commenting on the main episode, which airs Mondays, then you do the Immeasurably More thing on Fridays. What a beautiful thing. Because, in other words, I'm not trying to say you guys aren't smart, but you guys have a lot to add because you've lived so much of this yourself. But it's going to spur the thinking of others to say, hey, man, that's incredible, because my experience has been similar, but not quite exactly the same. And if God was doing all of that, just imagine how big God is. It's just such a fresh concept. Yeah. And Jill, I know you've been quiet as a church mouse there, which is fairly unusual. No, I'm just kidding. let me ask for your perspective on this, because I mean, what an exciting concept. First of all, that you get a chance to talk about, tragedy and God meeting us in those places, the joy in the midst of pain. In fact, I think the first episode's called Where Joy and Pain Collide. And the harsh reality of the fact that pain is resident, but that joy is there because Jesus is there. And then you guys get to sort of expound on that on Fridays. So your thoughts about all of this?
Well, yeah, I have a lot. So I have been very patient listening to my amazing daughter share. And she is. It's an incredible blessing to be able to actually do this with not only my daughter, but my mother as well.
Sure.
So God has blessed all three of us. But, as I was listening to Erin, I was thinking about the fact that God's story is the story. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We all have a testimony. We have a story. And yet our stories are so powerful because they're wrapped up in the greater story. And that's God's story. And so that's really what we're doing. We're ultimately sharing God's story through our stories and how he has intervened to bring us to the greatest story ever told of his son. And to be able to share that in a story format is incredible, because you cannot deny someone's story. I mean, they have the story that they have, and all these women and all these people that will be sharing their stories through the podcast, these stories are so incredibly powerful. But at the end of the day, the greater message is the message of God's story. So, and that's what I'm so excited about Immeasurably More as well, the mini messages, because you're right. Taking that one nugget spurs someone else listening to, consider something that they found in the testimony story, on Monday, and that there's so much more. And that's why it's called Immeasurably More, because there is immeasurably more. And we know that God can do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. And that's what we believe he's going to do with this podcast, not just with, the main episode on Monday, but certainly, too, with Immeasurably More mini messages. So I'm looking forward to sharing them. We've anticipated this time for quite some time, and I'm in awe already of what God has done, and can't wait for the response from the listener, and can't wait to involve the listener. I really hope, too, that this spurs other people on, as Erin mentioned, to share their own story, and that they might even be willing to share their story with us.
Oh, and I'm guarantee that many will. And I know I said this to you before we began our conversation today, but transparency begets transparency. When people are willing to be raw and open and honest and real, and I listened to a portion of that first podcast, and I was like, good Lord, this is gripping. Get your Kleenex out, because this is the real deal. People are going to be able to feel free to open up and share their pain and their sorrow and their hope and their joy, and I think it's going to be a tremendous blessing to everyone. We're going to need to take a break, but Erin, if you don't mind, because you're like the millennial in this gang here, if you could just tell us where you find this podcast. Like, I'm sure wherever podcasts are, but help direct us to where we can find Light Your Heart with Hope.
Yes, so we have an Instagram page called Light Your Heart with Hope. And there's a link in the bio where you can click on that, and then you can click between Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, really anywhere where you can find a podcast. But they are all linked in our bio. And also, if anyone is familiar with the Hunter's Hope website, you can go to the Hunter's Hope website and find the podcast there, and find links to the show notes of each episode and actually to learn more about our families too. So, yes, I would say the easiest thing to do is, you can go to our Instagram page. You can also find us through the Hunter's Hope Instagram page if you guys follow that as well. But I think it's cool, too, to share that if you do go on to the Hunter's Hope website under the Hope and Life section, and then you'll find podcasts. And you're really, if you listen to the episodes and you go to the website, you actually get to learn even more about these families and their stories, which I think is a nice little piece to add to it as well.
Okay. All right. So on Instagram, it's Light Your Heart with Hope, or go to the huntershope.org website, click on the information there that's available about this podcast, Light Your Heart with Hope. And, of course, this past Monday, the 7th, was the first episode, the mini episode that Jill and Erin do, describing some of the things they heard and learned in those first testimonies. It's called the Immeasurably More segment. That drops and airs on Friday. So you're going to want to look at this stuff. I mean, we're right in the middle of those 2 days. And so check it out for yourself. We got to take a break. We'll be back with more in just a moment. We have Erin Kelly Bean with us and her mom, Jill Kelly, Jill and Erin, hanging out, talking about this new Light Your Heart with Hope podcast. I've got a bunch of additional questions, and I hope we can get to some of those in just a moment. NBL Today, brought to you by our friends at Cornerstone Bookshop. All right, let's get back to it here. We've got Jill Kelly with us, her daughter, Erin Kelly Bean. Erin, of course, married to Parker. And Mary and I had a chance to go to that wedding, which was one of the most beautiful weddings we've ever been to. It was crazy.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. I don't even know how we made the list, but honestly, we were there, and we were blessed, and it was just awesome. But yeah, anyhow, you guys have moved back to the Buffalo area, of course, Erin and Parker, and so welcome back home to Western New York. So this podcast, Light Your Heart with Hope, it's going to be an opportunity for people to share their stories of God meeting them in their time of need, and really just the story of pain and struggle that life brings us, but a lot of it revolving around this disease, Krabbe's disease, or the leukodystrophies, if I'm saying that word correctly, this family of diseases. Ultimately, I think it sounds like you're going to be open to expanding that to other situations, maybe other medical conditions and stuff that people are going to be experiencing, but describe that aspect of it, because obviously the point of contact for you with these first 20 or so people who've already told their stories, and we'll be hearing those over the next 20 weeks or so, is the Hunter's Hope Foundation. So, Erin, if you could comment on that, I'd love to know what your thoughts are about that issue. Like, help us understand the connection, first of all, because of your brother Hunter's situation, but then perhaps down the road in the future, maybe opening it to things outside of leukodystrophies.
Yes, absolutely. And that is one of my ultimate goals and prayers and hopes, is that it will expand. And I believe that it will. That is our plan. But it did start as sharing our leukodystrophy families. You said it right, so good job. But Krabbe is one of various leukodystrophies, and Hunter's Hope. We have just so many incredible families who have walked through caring for a child with this disease, losing a child with this disease. And so when my grandma first started interviewing these people before I jumped onto the project, she was interviewing, these people that really we believe and feel like they are a part of our family because of what we've all walked through. And so we will be sharing a lot of their stories, and also we plan to have other people who have walked through different things in life come in and share their testimony as well. Because, if you look at our family, yes, we have our Hunter's Hope Foundation, and my brother being born with Krabbe and then going to heaven when he was 8.5 years old. And so, yes, we've walked that path, but our family has also walked the cancer route, which everybody knows someone that has had cancer, has someone in their family that has cancer or has had cancer themselves. No one is outside of that realm. And so, we are connected in that community, and we're also connected into the mental health community. And so there are so many avenues of people that we want to reach and so many stories that we want to share. I mean, I have a list of people that really aren't even a part of our Hunters Hope community, but that I want them to share their testimony because of the power of what God has done in their own life. And so, yes, this expands what far outside of our leukodystrophy community. The first several episodes that people will hear will be from these families, but I absolutely believe that you don't have to have gone through that sort of circumstance in order to get incredible hope and encouragement through listening to these people share.
I agree 100%. Jill, I'll get to you in 1 second. I'm sorry to feel like I'm keep putting you off, but this is so good, and I want to.
I love listening.
All right.
I love listening to Erin. I feel like I'm listening to you guys. I love it.
Well, I just have to ask this question, and please know that I mean it with sensitivity and utmost respect. We've spoken to your mom. Obviously, Jill, you wrote the book Without a Word, and you talked about the impact that Hunter's life had on yours and how ultimately God used all that to bring you to faith in Christ. And I want to hear more of that. I want to get your perspective now. A number of years have passed since Hunter went home to be with Jesus, and so get your renewed perspective on all that in just a moment. But Erin, let me ask you, as his sister, what prolonged impact has his life and or his death had on your life? Because obviously this is still central to who you are as a person. I mean, we're now entering a phase where you're going to be doing a podcast, reaching out to others who've struggled. It must have had some ongoing, I don't know what the right word is, but ongoing impact on your life, and yet obviously God's continued to meet you in that place. But can you tell us about that as Hunter's sister, what the impact has been for you and what joy you've experienced in the midst of the pain?
I mean, Hunter's life absolutely has shaped every aspect of my own life. From the time he was born, I mean, we're 2 years apart, and so I grew up with Hunter, being terminally ill, but I never saw him that way. My mom and I talk about all the time how when Hunter was here, those were the most joyful days of our life. Like, those memories will forever be with me, and because of Hunter and what he went through and watching my mom and my grandma seek after God, that is what made me want to have a relationship with God. And so if it weren't for Hunter, I don't know where I would be today. I don't know if I would be saved. God totally used Hunter's life to, bring me to salvation, my family, extended family. And so while he was here on earth, yes, he made a tremendous impact on so many people's lives, but his legacy lives on. And I pray and hope that as his older sister that I will forever carry on that legacy. And it's really a legacy of Christ and what he did and the hope found in him. And it's so much bigger than all of us. And also, too, it's been since 2005, so I think that's 17 years that Hunter has been in heaven. And I have, I didn't grieve when I lost Hunter when I was 10 years old, and so I was too young, I feel like, to grieve. And so over the last few years, I've gone through my own season of grief and dealing with that. And so it's allowed me to see and be an inspiration and encouragement to other people who, have similar situations. And so Hunter's life, he will forever be a part of my life. And it is interesting how God uses both the seasons of when he was here on earth to impact me and since he went to heaven, too.
One more thing, Erin. Can I just be raw and real for a minute? Because on the one hand,
absolutely.
On the one hand, I know that there was great joy in knowing your brother and learning from him. And though your mom says, most of what she learned from him happened even though he never spoke a word, I'm sure that you would say similar things. So there was joy there, but also, because of the fall and sin and brokenness and pain and disease and death and so forth, we have to experience pain on this planet. There's no way around it. Death sucks. And so let me just say that. So on the one hand, you've experienced the joy of God, thank you for Hunter. But have you ever been angry at God to say, why did you take him? Why did this happen? Why couldn't he have lived longer? Because I would imagine there would have to be some anger there as well, and that would be natural.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've experienced anger at God. I've asked God why. I've questioned who I always thought that God was. And, I think that exactly what my mom shares in the podcast is that joy and pain can walk hand in hand, and that my greatest pain was when Hunter went to heaven. Like, that was my greatest pain, was losing my brother, but my greatest joy is knowing that I will see him again. And so God, and I believe with all of my heart that, if anyone's listening that has felt angry at God or does feel angry at God and is asking God why, like, he's a big enough God and a power enough God that he can handle that. Mm-hmm. And God really did meet me right where I was in the midst of my anger and questioning God. And it's interesting how, I was 10 when Hunter went to heaven. And in those young, early stages of my life, I didn't question God. I wasn't angry at God. It wasn't until, honestly, the last few years that, I'm dealing with all of this grief and going through those questions of asking God why and allowing myself to be angry. And so that's real with life. Like, we go through extremely hard things in this life, and that's the beauty of having a relationship with God, is that he takes us right where we are in the midst of the pain and the joy, and in the midst of the anger and the hurt and all of those things. He's there. And in my own story, he's walked alongside me through it all, the good, bad, the ugly, all of it.
Brings tears to my eyes just listening to that. And Jill, I met a little boy this past weekend. Mary and I were out celebrating our anniversary, and some families came to celebrate with us, and there was a little boy there, 3 years old, who had some type of a heart condition. I can't really explain it fully, but I know that he was in a desperate situation. At one point, prior to his birth, he was literally, like, his heartbeat was in the 250 range or whatever, and after he was born, it got as high as 316 beats a minute, which actually is a record at Oshai Children's Hospital. Wow. And the doctor was, one day soon we're going to be telling that story here. In fact, I'd love to connect you with this family because they know and love the Lord, and it's an incredible story. But literally the doctor said that the way to save his life was to put plastic over his face and suffocate him while putting ice on his forehead, which creates sort of a manufactured brain freeze, but it resets all the calibrations for your heart and everything else. The emergency room doctors were looking at each other like, are you kidding me right now? And by the way, the doctor was saying this over the phone on his way rushing to the hospital, but you need to save this boy's life, and I'm asking you, you got to do this right now. The family was terrified, thinking they're going to lose this little boy. Through that pregnancy, they had been advised, look, he's not going to live. He's not going to be able, he's unviable. And they said, just, you could be pregnant again in 5 months. So, like, just move on, right? Just move on. I saw that little boy swimming in a pool, playing with his friends, perfectly normal. By God's grace, God intervened that day and restarted his heart the correct way and with normal beats per minute and the whole thing. And it's just absolutely, totally a miracle. The reason I'm bringing it up is because there are people in the world who think that a child with a disability or with some type of a terminal illness, as Erin described it, really has nothing to offer. And especially if they're confined to a wheelchair or they're nonverbal, like, well, what's the point, right? I mean, where's the quality of life? And yet, every joy that you've described today was found somehow in that relationship with God and Hunter. And I just wonder, as a mom, your thoughts about that, because obviously Hunter was also a source of tremendous joy for you. And in the first podcast, you're pouring your heart out talking about the joy of seeing him again one day. Can you help us understand from your perspective this idea of the value of human life, though it's not perfect in God's eyes?
Oh, absolutely. Life is a gift, period. And I believe in the podcast that, we didn't have to search for purpose. There was purpose in every moment. And Hunter taught us that. God taught us that through Hunter's life, that each moment we're given, no matter what our circumstances are, has purpose. Because God, in and through us, has given us life and breath, and therefore, our life has purpose. And there's so much I want to say after hearing what Erin shared, but also hearing the story that you just shared about a little boy with a heart condition, because Erin and Parker's nephew went to heaven not too long ago after living on earth for 16 months. And he had a heart condition. Oh. And in his life, we were just at his celebration of life not too long ago in Pennsylvania, and oh my goodness, just 16 months. And this little boy, God used this little boy to change people's lives. So let's not doubt the fact that God can use anyone. He can use those who cannot speak. He can use those with heart conditions. He can use anybody at any time to bring himself glory and to point back to the whole point, which is Jesus. Like, he is the point and he is the prize in all of this. And I believe our stories, Hunter's story, my story, Erin's story, the story you just shared, Hayes' story, that's Erin's nephew, are all pointing back to the greater story, and that's God's story. But ultimately, too, I just want to add, because Erin mentioned it before. See, this is what happens, Neil, when you I sit back and listen. And my mind is going like, okay, I got to say something about that. I got to say something about that. But I also want to just, Erin, I have watched Erin. I have watched Erin go through a very difficult season. The last 5 years, she has gone through a lot, and she has gone through a season of mental health, a season of a lot of other things, and I'm going to say I share all those things. That's for her to share. And part of that has been grief, and her grief has been expressed in various ways, and it has been incredibly difficult. Here I have walked through, Hunter's life and everything that was wrapped up in that, and then Jim going through cancer 3 times, and then my daughter Erin experiencing what she has these last 5 years, and I, watching her struggle and her grief has been very difficult for me, and I have had to and it's been, when I say it's difficult, I mean, I started to question God, and I started to ask why questions, and I was getting angry, and I was wondering, I'm like, God, where are you? Where are you? Again, we're going through something again, and I was pretty raw with God. But again, as Erin said, he met me right where I was, whether that was on my face at night, bawling my eyes out, begging for him to heal our family in every way that we need to be healed, or whether that was, I got to go for a walk because I'm really anxious right now. Mm-hmm. I got to get outside and I got to go for a walk and I got to pray and listen to worship. God met me as Erin's mom and going through all that she's gone through the last 5 years in the place that I needed him most. And he continues to be faithful. That's one thing I want to say. God is faithful.
Amen.
Regardless of where my faith is, because sometimes my faith, I don't even know if it's mustard seed. If you hear me, where's my mustard seed? I need that little mustard seed right now. I have felt like I lost all faith, but God has not left me because he's the one who's faithful. And all the things that he has promised to us are yes and amen in Christ. And not only that, he who began a good work in us will be faithful to complete it. Who's completing it? He is. That's where I turn. That is where I turn, to the promises of God, to the encouragement that he has given us through, his word. And the fact that, he has brought us this far. He's not going to let go. He's not going to leave us in this place. He's God. He's got this covered. And I need to remind myself, literally, as I'm saying this, I'm preaching to myself right now.
You go, girl. That's awesome. The whole thing is just so powerful, and I've got a lot I want to say now, but we got to take a break. I just want to remind you, by the way, that Erin and Jill have co-authored a couple of books, including Hot Chocolate with God, another one called Kelly Tough. Jill wrote some books like, Without a Word, and others that you can find online, of course. But today we're talking about a podcast that they're doing together also with Erin's grandma, and it's called Light Your Heart with Hope. And it features the stories of people who've been through incredible circumstances and incredible pain. The first episode, which aired on Monday and is now available, is called Where Joy and Pain Collide, and it's actually Jill's story. You're welcome to check it out. Fridays each week, there's another segment there called Immeasurably More, where Jill and Erin glean information and parts and bits and pieces of those stories and talk about how those stories have impacted their own life and things they've learned about similar things in their own story. And the whole thing is just incredibly powerful, because the power in these stories is God himself, as Jill pointed out earlier. We got to take a break, though. Listen, if you want to find any one of these, this podcast, or get any one of connected to any of the information that's available, I just urge you to check out huntershope.org. That would be one place to go, or on Instagram, Light Your Heart with Hope. And we'll continue our conversation here momentarily with Erin Kelly Bean and Jill Kelly. Thanks for listening to NBL on WDCX. Today's program brought to you by our friends at Firth Jewelers. All right, we're back with Erin Kelly Bean and Jill Kelly talking about a brand new podcast that is exceptional, and you need to check it out. It's available wherever you get your podcasts, but on Instagram you can go to Light Your Heart with Hope, or check out huntershope.org for information about this brand new podcast that features the stories of people who have experienced joy in the midst of pain. So, let me ask you this, Erin. I just want to throw this out to you because it occurred to me as your mom was talking, and based on some things you were saying, that we're talking about hope and we're talking about our stories. But the reality is, since there's breath in our lungs, our stories aren't over, meaning none of us are completed books yet. So, how is our story going to end? What's the final chapter, or what do the final few chapters look like? And we all love Hallmark movies, right? But the point is, there's immeasurable hope because God can do all things. And no matter where we are today, there's still hope for where God wants to take us in the future. And so one of the things I love about this podcast is that you guys aren't just coming on here like, hey, we're the experts, we've experienced all this. What I hear in what you're saying is that you as well are in a learning mode, still processing some of the pain, still experiencing more joy, and still learning more about God along the way, which is a really healthy place to be, because all of us need to be open and teachable and moldable and shapeable and whatever the right term would be. But any thoughts about that, Erin? Because as much as you have experienced pain and struggle, especially as a little girl, my goodness, and then still, the ramifications of it years later as a married woman, the reality is God's not done yet. This final chapter has not been written. How hopeful is that?
Right, absolutely. And actually what you said reminds me, I don't know the title of the song, but it says that it's not over until it's good. And when I first heard that, I was like, what do you mean it's not over till it's good? What is good? But as believers, if we remember that God is good and that in his word he says that that he will complete what he has started. And so as believers, too, we know that the end is good because the end is heaven. The end is eternity. And so when I think about my own story and the stories I've heard from these amazing people, I know that, the ending is good and that God isn't finished with us yet. And if we're still here, if we are still breathing, if there is oxygen in our lungs, God is not done using us. And I think in that sense, we need to be willing and open to God using us in whatever way. And when I think about the fact that, God still has me here, God still has our family here, and that God used Hunter's short life in such an immeasurable way, I can say that the ending of Hunter's life here on earth was good, and that his life in heaven is even greater and more amazing, and that we too, because we have put our faith in Christ, we know that the ending of our story is really just the beginning, because our life here may end, but our life in heaven is going to be for eternity. Amen. And that's something that God has really showed me too, is that what I thought was the end was only the beginning. In my own story and in my own life, there have been so many times where I've been like, God, this is the end. Like, I can't go on from here. Like, this has got to be the end. This circumstance has to end. This pain has to end. And God has shown me that, no, this could just be the beginning of another chapter that I'm writing in this greater story. And ultimately, it is his story. It's his greater story being told through my life and through each of our lives. It's
so good. And I don't mean to be trite in any way, so please don't hear that, but I'm just imagining Hunter right now looking at us having this conversation going, oh, you guys ain't seen nothing. You ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
You know?
Amen.
Hallelujah.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm going to come back to Erin for the final word, but Jill, we only got a couple minutes left here. Anything else you want to add here in our conversation today about this? This is just so good.
Yeah, you know what? Thanks again for having us on. But ultimately, what we've said is so true, that God wrote a story, and we're part of it. We're part of that story, and every breath we take is a gift. And this world is riddled with pain, and yet in the midst of that pain, when we focus on Jesus, we have hope. But when we focus on our circumstances, it's easy to fall apart. But even in falling apart, God is there, and he's in the midst of it all. And I'm just so thankful to share stories, and I'm so thankful that we get to, take some nuggets and share immeasurably more, because that's what God does, immeasurably more.
Every single Monday, you're going to get a chance to hear a new testimony, and then on Friday, Jill and Erin will talk about that in the Immeasurably More segment, so you can obviously avail yourself of all that by checking out this podcast, Light Your Heart with Hope. Erin, I want to give you the final word. Anything else you want to say about it, or where you get it, or anything from your heart, since you're the host of this whole thing?
Yes, and it is an honor and a blessing to be the host and be surrounded by my mom and my grandma walking alongside me in all of this. And just one thing, just thank you again for, sharing this. And I hope and pray that people who do listen are encouraged and find the greater hope in Christ. But the last thing I just want to say to anyone listening right now is that you have a story to share. Your story is worth sharing. Your life, your story, it's not over. You're not too far gone. There is still hope for you. And that is my prayer through all of this, is that people will know that God can do immeasurably more through your story, and it's worth sharing, and it can honestly change someone's life. If it's only one life that's changed, it's worth it. It's worth sharing your story.
It's so good. On Instagram, Light Your Heart with Hope, or go to huntershope.org for more information about this brand new podcast, now available from Erin and Jill Kelly, and of course, their mom and grandma, Jackie, is involved as well. You're going to hear stories of all kinds of people who've experienced tremendous pain and struggle in their lives, and yet also are aware of the fact that God is there in the midst of it, bringing joy. And none of our stories are finished. I so appreciate you bringing that up. Well, God bless you. Thank you both for being with us. You're welcome here anytime.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you
so much.
Miss you.